Terence Crawford tries to lil bro Gervonta Tank Davis and say, you know, why don't you fight on my undercard, the biggest fight in the sport of boxing, where Terence Crawford's going to be fighting Canelo Alvarez. Terence tells Gervonta Tank Davis, fight Shakur on my undercard, we can make a big fight happen. And, you know, ultimately that's kind of disrespect to Tank, because saying that Tank belongs on his undercard is basically saying, like, yeah, you're a star, but I'm a bigger star. I'm the big dog, you know, you're still, you know, the lil pup ultimately. But I feel like Tank is just such a big draw on his own. I feel like you just have to make him the star, the main event, and he has to be the pay-per-view attraction, because I think, no offense to Terence Crawford, but Tank's a bigger star than Terence Crawford is. And I'm not saying that Tank's a pound-for-pound better fighter than Terence Crawford, but just marketability and pay-per-view sales don't lie. Tank is the better, you know, draw between Terence Crawford and Gervonta Tank Davis. So for Terence to say Tank should fight on his undercard, you know, against Shakur, I understand that, but even Shakur said, you know, Tank and Shakur is its own pay-per-view fight. That fight's going to sell on its own. How would you even split the money? And ultimately, Tank, we already know he doesn't want to even, you know, go to Saudi Arabia. It's funny, you know, when I was interviewing Tank, he was talking about Turkey Al-Sheikh, and he was telling me, like, it's weird. You know, a lot of weird stuff is going on in Saudi Arabia. That's what Tank said. And he said that a lot of people are getting sick. People pull out of fights. So it's just like, you know, getting acclimated. Yeah, these guys are getting paid from Turkey Al-Sheikh, and that's a great thing. But also, you know, the traveling does take a toll. You know, acclimating to the climate and the conditions in Saudi Arabia as opposed to wherever they train, whether it's in Southern California, whether it's in, you know, Florida, Texas, wherever these guys may be training and holding their training camps. Going to Saudi Arabia is difficult. So Tank probably isn't interested in fighting on Terence Crawford's undercard, to say the least. You know, he's the big dog. I'm not going to lie. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Terence Crawford, because I know that Bud Crawford and Canelo is a big event, but to say that Shakur and Tank should be on the undercard is crazy, because it's just too big of an event. You know, I understand, you know, Shakur and Kid Austin fighting on the undercard of Bivol and Better Be a Part 2, but for Tank and Shakur, I'd argue that's the biggest fight in boxing, because that's really like the best at 135 fighting each other. With Terence Crawford, it's low risk for him, because ultimately if he loses to Canelo, which a lot of people think he is, I think Bud has a chance, but if he loses to Canelo, no one's going to hate on him for it. You know, they might clown him a little bit if he gets stopped, but Terence Crawford's, you know, moving up 2 weight classes. Of course, there's risk in that, there's danger in that, but when it comes to the legacy, no one's really going to discredit Terence Crawford for losing to Canelo. They would say, oh, we dared to be great, right? But Canelo Alvarez, you know, gets bashed for not taking that fight initially, right? So it's just like, I feel like Terence Crawford understands that Canelo and him, you know, that's the biggest fight, you know, in the sport of boxing right now. That's what Terence is saying. I think it's a big fight. I think it's a huge fight, but I don't know if it's bigger than Shakur and Tank. I don't know if it's bigger than Ryan Garcia versus Haney Part 2. I don't know if it's bigger than Tank and Ryan Part 2, because those are such huge fights. You guys got to think about the fan bases in the US and how popular Ryan Garcia, Tank, and the bad blood with Devin Haney. Those fights are so big. As big as Canelo Alvarez is, we know how big Canelo is and how much of a draw he is, especially when it comes to bringing out that Mexican fan base. I understand that, but Terence Crawford, he's a big draw to an extent, but he's not on the level of Ryan Garcia and Tank. And I've seen that firsthand when it comes to, you know, the press conferences, when it comes to the weigh-ins, when it comes to just being a pay-per-view draw. Terence Crawford isn't on, you know, Tank's level, I don't think. You know, I think Tank is that marketable guy, and Terence Crawford, you know, even though I'd say he's accomplished more in the sport of boxing than Tank has, he's a pound-for-pound better fighter than Tank, at least up until this point, because Tank is still, you know, he has a lot more to accomplish in the sport still left in his career. But I know that Tank's a bigger star. You know, people love Tank. Tank sells out wherever he goes, and that's not trying to disrespect Terence. It's just Terence doesn't do a lot of press. He doesn't do a lot of media until now, and you know, he's going to cash out with this Canelo fight, and hopefully he puts on a great fight, maybe even pulls off a victory. But Shakur and Tank is a huge fight, and that's a fight, you know, where they're both comfortable at that weight class. They belong in that weight class, and there's no excuses about weight, how there are in the Canelo and Crawford fight. So I think that's the biggest fight for me, in my opinion, is Shakur and Tank. But we'll see what happens with Canelo and Crawford. I think it's a great fight, but I ultimately think that You know, Canelo's weight will be a little bit too much, but I still give Crawford, you know, a more than decent chance of pulling it off because he is the faster fighter and he has a lot of experience as well, and the skills pay the bills ultimately. So let me know down below what you guys think. Thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next Nabs Boxing video. Peace.